Welcome to the My House Podcast, a show about the past, present, and future goings-on at the My House Youth Drop-In Center in Wasilla, Alaska, with your host, Michelle Overstreet.
Welcome to episode 1 of the My House Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Overstreet, and I'm joined today by Michael Carson.
Thank you for the invitation, Michelle.
Thanks for joining us. This is awesome. Today, Michael and I are going to be discussing some of the early days of My House, how we got it started, some of the challenges and triumphs of getting a non-traditional nonprofit off the ground. And before we go to that, let's check in with Isaac for some housekeeping.
Thanks, Michelle. We have a couple things going on here at My House this month. First of all, the theme of the month is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. Helping to just raise the community's level of knowledge on the subject. And you actually have a stat for what is the stat for the teen dating violence?
1 out of 3. 1 out of 3 teens that are involved in a relationship when they are teenagers experience some kind of dating violence in the state of Alaska.
It's just shocking to me personally, but that's why it's the theme of the month. So look for some stuff on our social media or down here at the My House building talking about that. Also, on the 19th of February, we have the Wearable Art Show here at the boutique, showings at 3 p.m. and 7 p.m., right?
The Wearable Art Show is actually at the Palmer Depot.
Oh,
but you can get tickets here at the boutique.
Okay, yes. Come buy tickets at the boutique and then go over to the Palmer Depot for the art show. Matinee at 3 p.m. and then the 7 o'clock showing as well.
That's correct.
And then also on the 19th at noon, maybe before you go over to the art show, if you're over at the Elks Lodge at Finger Lake, we're going to have some staff members jumping in for the polar plunge.
That's correct. The Sertoma organization hosts a polar plunge every year, and we always have a team that goes from My House.
How many do we have volunteered for that right now? We have some that are like skirting around the edges of the pool, I think is the phrase. It's a really cold pool, to be fair.
Yeah, to be fair. It's an ice block of a pool, but we have 4 that are committed and a few others that are just on the sidelines thinking about it. We usually have about a half a dozen that jump in, and you'll see them in bright orange My House sweatshirts.
I'm busy. I can't do it. I'm busy.
That's what they all say, Isaac.
Okay. All right. Well, then let's get into the main topic because I think it's really interesting, especially for me who doesn't know a ton about our early history. It's just kind of how we all got started here at My House. And when did you and Michael actually meet?
Oh, my gosh. I'm not sure I remember. Do you remember, Michael?
I believe it very well was that first homeless and housing and homeless meeting at Covenant Church on the Palmer-Wasilla Highway. We had not met formally at that point. I remember being in that meeting. I remember Jim Beck being there, obviously Dave Rose, maybe John Rossi. And I remember sitting in the meeting and hearing about their 10-year plan. And I thought about that for a while, and I hadn't seen anything come to fruition. I didn't see anything actually being in existence. I just saw this plan, and like you said, maybe they've had it for the last 13 years. I don't remember that part, but I just didn't see anything, on the ground. I didn't see any real action. It was just this plan. And then I remember very distinctly you standing up and making that announcement that we needed a 10-month plan, not a 10-year plan. And my first reaction to that was, I want to work with that woman. I want to work with somebody that their hair is on fire. They're passionate, they want to get things done. So I basically just circumvent, and I don't even know if I went to too many more of those type of meetings because, like I said, I didn't see a lot of action going on. And so that was our first formal meeting. But I do remember working at Rochelle and us having some conversations because some of the students at Michelle were doing presentations during that forum time. And at that time, it was about smoking. And I remember us sitting down, helping them kind of sharpen up their presentation. And I do remember just being enamored with those youth that were really stepping up, and two youth that really jumped off the page were Kurt and Kira, who are still with us today.
Yeah.
And I believe Kurt might have been that barista that was behind the counter at Michelle delivering coffee on that program that you were talking about. I think he was the guy.
He was. He ran the cafe.
Then he became the guy behind the counter when we, eventually were able to open my house. And as a sidebar, if we're talking about sidebars, I taught for 35 years in the district, and I never had the opportunity to be part of an opening of a new school. I always seemed to come on board later, as you know, for whatever reason. And I never had the opportunity to do that. And I remember that first morning, September, maybe 10 years ago now, driving down at 6 o'clock in the morning, like I was going to work, and ending up at the My House parking lot. It was kind of dark. And I remember coming in, and I remember Kurt behind the counter. And then I remember Jess Letterman right behind me, also another board member that might talk about Jess also. But what I got to do was flip on the open switch. And so it was the first time in my professional career that I got to open up a building. And that was so satisfactory. And I just loved that opportunity to be part of something brand new, cutting edge, and that was making a difference in youth's lives. So
yeah, you bought the first cup of coffee in the
I
cafe.
did.
Yeah, that was
yeah.
And that, it was so interesting how that came about. I started out in Palmer looking for a location, and there was an old building out in front of the Pioneer Home that I thought would be perfect, and the city of Palmer said, no, we don't want to lease you that building. In fact, we don't want to lease you any building. We don't really want homeless kids in our town. And so I that was a little eye-opening for me, and I came to the city of Wasilla and spoke with the mayor and the city manager and said, here's my PowerPoint, the same one that I had done for the Housing and Homeless Coalition, and this is what I'd like to build. Can you see that in Wasilla? Do you see a space for that in Wasilla? And the mayor was very optimistic, Vern Rupright. And then the city manager leaned over and said, what do you need to get that started? I think that's a great idea. And about 3 weeks later, he called me and said, I found a building that's a warehouse, and it's an empty electrical warehouse. It's been vacant except for shelving, and it's all dusty for about a year and a half. The owner passed away, and would you like to take a look at it? And so Michael and I gathered up 3 or 4 kids that had been part of the cafe at Burchell. And when we came over, Michael, you mentioned Kurt Honak, and that he was running the cafe in the school. And when we walked in the front door of this electrical warehouse, there was a corner that had windows in it. And he stood there for a few minutes, looked all around. The kids were just looking around like they were trying to visualize what we were talking about doing. And Kurt turned around to me and said, this would be perfect for the cafe with the windows right here. And we could build a coffee shop right here. And I got jelly-legged, and it was like goosebumps all over my body. And I just thought, oh my God, we're really going to do this. And it was we had about $90,000 worth of build-in work to do. And I think we had $12,000 in the bank from fundraising that would cover, 3 months rent. And so it was a little bit crazy. And signing the lease, we lost a board member who said, I just don't think it's going to work. I don't want to be fiscally responsible for something that I don't think will work. And we had construction companies that came in, Criterion and Collins and Pitcher Electric and Vanoy Electric and Premier Electric, and they all came in and helped us build this cafe in the middle of this dusty electrical warehouse. And that's how we got started. And Michael came that morning and turned on the open sign, and Far North Mechanical put all of this plumbing in from the back to the front so that we had water out in the front where there had just been electrical shelving. I never even met the owner of that company. He had a plumber here for over a month and donated all the materials and equipment to do that, including the sinks and the copper pipe and all the stuff that was needed. It was incredible. CCR, Commercial Contractors Incorporated in Anchorage, donated all the flooring for in there, and I never met the owner. I called him and described what we were doing, and he said, I'll just send it to you, and I'll send someone to install it for you. I love your idea. And so we were really blessed right out of the chute with about $100,000 in donations, with people that understood what we were trying to do for kids and the mission of what we were trying to do. And what was fascinating, and Michael, thank you for reminding me of this, was that all the people who were working in housing and homeless at the time were saying, it'll never work, it'll never work, it'll never work. And the foundations were saying, we don't think it'll work. And in the meantime, we had kids in here in the middle of the night helping the tile guy install tile on the floor. And when I would come in the morning early, they would say, we didn't have anywhere else to go, but we heard you were building something for us, so we just thought we'd come and help. And it was very moving. We knew right out of the chute when the kids came with us from Rochelle to run the coffee shop, and the kids that were coming in for services early on, we knew that they understood that we had a heart for what we were doing. Michael was working hard with the substance use disorder clients and getting kids to meetings. Michael, do you want to talk about that a little bit? That was the wild early days.
Yeah, and I just want to back up a little bit and just let everyone know that I remember when we walked into that building and we put down that money for rent, and the first thing we had to do was pull out some old carpeting. And when we pulled out the old carpeting, the flooring people looked at that, and we realized that because that building was as old as it was, that flooring had shifted, and that before we could even lay the tile, there had to be some leveling. And I remember, that was kind of like the first thing out of the gate that we had to deal with because of this old building. But then, as Michelle mentioned, so many people involved. And if you remember correctly, Michelle, many of the workers would share their own personal lived experiences with maybe being homeless, having, previous substance use disorder issues.
Sure did.
And they were just all so excited about what we were doing. And so once we got, things up and running somewhat, we needed to start having some meetings where these youth that wanted to stay clean and sober, wanted to be in recovery, needed the support. And so we used that conference room, and we had a schedule of regular meetings, but then also I provided all the local meetings with all the local AANA groups, from Serenity, to all the other groups that were in the Valley, High Noon, and meeting kids at meetings. And that was at the very, very beginning, a lot of kids. I really was excited about their recovery. I was fortunate at the time when we first opened up to have 20 years clean and sober. And this last October, I celebrated 33 years. So it was exciting for me to share my recovery and see them in their recovery and see the change, the light in their eyes, and just wanting to also begin to share their recovery. And now we have a number of former clients that are peer-to-peer coaches. And that has just been very exciting to see that evolution also. And so these kids have come a long way. And it is amazing what happens when you just give them some foundation, you give them some scaffolding, and they are, able to climb out of whatever hole they might have been in, and being able to be productive and successful community members. I mean, that is just so incredible to see that change in our young people.
That I love that you mentioned that peer support, Michael, because I really feel like that was such a cornerstone. You taught them that. And the idea that they could all get together and create a culture that was their own, of healing, of shedding some of the stigma of being homeless. I remember one time there was a young man who came in early in the morning, and he said that he had been sitting out in front of the grocery store down the street all day the day before. And at about 7 o'clock at night, after we were closed here, a lady came by and said, if you go down the street 2 blocks tomorrow morning on the right-hand side, there's people there that will help you. And he said that she was the only person that spoke to him. He sat out there all day and he felt invisible. And he came in the next morning, and the case manager was helping him, and he got a cup of coffee from the cafe. That's a normal thing. We have coffee on reserve. So if you come to buy a coffee for yourself, you can pay $1 and buy a cup of coffee for a kid. And he was sitting and had this cup of coffee that he was drinking. And she was asking him questions like for his intake and finding out what his needs were. And as he was answering, he was kind of folding up, and I could see that he was crying. And I thought maybe he had experienced some trauma. So I came out to try to be a support person and just said, is there anything that I can get you, or tell me what's happening? And he said, I just feel overwhelmed. He said, yesterday, I sat in front of the grocery store all day and no one even looked at me. And he said, today I'm sitting here and someone asked me if I wanted to take a shower or if I was hungry, and I have a hot cup of coffee and a nice lady that's asking me about what I need. And he said, I'm just overwhelmed. And it struck me that I think we underestimate the impact of youth in communities being ignored, and the perception that they don't want to be included in community, that they don't want to be spoken to or addressed, and that they don't want help. And I think that's another myth. I think that's another supposition that is just not accurate. And if you, especially with that peer support, Michael, those young people that have had some success, reaching out and saying, hey, I know how you feel. I felt that same way. Here's what I found. And bringing them forward, it's a game changer.
Yeah, there is obviously that stigma out there, and you and I have, experienced that personally on a related subject about kids and needing that safe harbor, needing a place where they can feel, uplifted. I remember, Michelle, distinctly having a local state representative coming to my house, sitting down with us and telling us that we were harboring and enabling homeless youth and that we needed to send them home. Right. And we had to respectfully explain to her that we surveyed our youth and we found that 45% of them left home not because of their substance use issues or mental health or behavioral health issues, but their parents.
Yes.
And that I remember we had to change our logo at the very beginning. We were considering the logo, Your Home. And the kids said, I don't want anything to do with being home. And we had to change it to You're Welcome Here.
That's
and
right.
Then when you ask kids about homeless youth, about having to blast out of their home and why, then all of a sudden we're talking about 65, 70% talking about issues of abuse, neglect. It was a real eye-opening experience.
Yes, it
for
was.
having someone that we thought would know better to tell us that we needed to send them home.
Yeah.
And wow. That
Boy,
was,
I remember that so vividly, Michael, because it was so striking. And that number, that total number was 76% of kids said that they left home because of somebody else's drug or alcohol use, mental health challenges, or a step parent that didn't abuse, or a step parent that didn't want them. And that the step parent that didn't want them was surprising to us, and it wasn't a small number. But that data really helped us having kids be honest about what their circumstances and situations were, and offering an alternative. And at that time, we didn't have housing. They were coming here for job training, for help getting their driver's license, their ID, to learn some skills that would help them to be self-sufficient. But that really was striking. We had no idea what that data looked like. And I think, again, another myth in the community was that we just needed to send those kids home. And in the 12 years that we've been doing this, when a kid says, I can't go home, it's not safe for me there, and we see some of the bruises on them, we see some of the marks on their bodies, and some of the stories that they tell about what they've experienced. We can file reports with Child Protective Services, but the long and short of the situation is it is not safe for them to be there.
I mean, tell a homeless kid to go home. Tell a guy in a wheelchair to get up and walk. I mean, what are you asking them to do? There's a reason why they're homeless in the first place.
That's exactly right. That's exactly
and
right.
some of those wounds, they're not exterior wounds. Many of those wounds, they're carrying inside their heart and soul. And that trauma has to be dealt with some way or another, and providing them some tools. Because I remember, Michelle, we had some volunteers come in, Linda Chudd, and maybe some other women that were coming in that were doing empowering groups. So we had a combination of recovery groups, empowering groups. And I remember Jess Letterman, he really wanted kids to have financial support groups. And so that kids could understand about checking accounts and opening checking accounts. And so having a full range of wraparound services. I remember public health, and I remember Dr. Butler, who was the former Alaska medical chief before Dr. Ann Zink. He was so excited when he came to my house and got to see that we had a public office, public health office, and he took pictures, and having those women from the local Wasilla public office come in on Fridays, have discussion around safe sex and how to prevent STDs, and having some conversations that didn't happen in school, unfortunately. And maybe that's the reason they ended up where they were, because they didn't have that vital information. So the wraparound services, from the outreach that Jay does, and the showers and the clothing, and then obviously the job training. What I really liked was, getting back to the cafe, is when you walked in, you didn't know who was behind the counter. You didn't know if they were just someone that came in and was looking for work, or if they were a homeless person. And I loved it when I would hear someone shout my name and they would say, "Hey, Mr. Carson." And then I would know they would be a former student, or they would shout out Michael, and I would know that they were a former, individual at the Matsu Youth Facility in detention, because I ran a group there. So it was always so wonderful to see kids on the outside and starting to just blossom. And that is just so rewarding.
Yeah, it's just the idea that they have a place. When they do walk into that cafe, they recognize the kids behind the counter have experienced some of the same things they have, and that we have services that will actually help. We recently had a young man who came out from the Sullivan Arena. He was in congregate shelter there with 400 to 500 other adults. And as a young adult, I think he's 21, he was just haggard when he got here. He was just beat down. And I said, what was it like there? And he said, well, it was horrible. And I said, describe for me some of the things that were really challenging. And he said, well, anything that you can't hold on to while you're asleep gets stolen. So I basically have a backpack that I use for a pillow, and that's everything that I own. And when you're asleep, people touch you, and he said they would touch my hair and play with my hair. And he said, so I never felt like I could really go to sleep. I couldn't rest. And we had meals that were little packaged meals that came into the building, and I was always hungry. There weren't meals like, he goes, here, you have supper club, and there's big pans of hot food that makes me feel full. And he said, I never had that there. And it probably took him 3 weeks to just get rested and fed to the point where I believe he could think straight. And so I really think that there's and during that whole time, he's surrounded by young people who are working through some of the same issues that he's working through, and they're having conversations about, oh yes, I'm trying to get my ID back, and getting my food card so I can work in the cafe, and there are groups of them that go through those things together. A roommate at housing that he could play games with, that he is familiar with. And so just finding a place to rest and get their bellies full. 18, 19-year-old kids that are hungry do not make good decisions. They end up in juvenile detention, Michael, because they do
Absolutely.
dumb stuff, right?
And, when you talked about the idea of fulfilling their needs, having 3 different task forces evolve out of my house really speaks to the issues around substance use disorders, which the Matsu Opioid Task Force has taken on, suicide issues that Justin Pendergrass has taken on with his alliance group, and then Stacy with no trafficking, human trafficking. And I don't know, Michelle, if there is any other nonprofit that does what we do. I mean, we talk about wraparound services, and most people might think that we feed kids, which we do, house kids, which we do, public health, which we do, and everything else. But having 3 task forces that are being recognized at the state level, and even maybe at the federal level, with Senator Lisa Murkowski and Dan Sullivan, and the summits that we have had at the Glenn Massey Theater, and the work that Justin has done, and now Stacy most recently at the governor's office, state governor's office. I think that my house has really shown other communities that they can step up and lean in and do what we do. And what we do is we can help them with that. So that is pretty remarkable, that I believe that is something that is very, very unique to my house, and that our work is really, really making an impact across the state. And I mean, I can't say enough for Stacy and Justin and the work they're doing. It's just remarkable. And especially John Green in that conversation, or that telephone conversation, and that he called you. And that was a pretty remarkable launching of the Matsu Opioid Task Force.
That's an interesting thing, Michael, that I really think harkens back to our founding, and that first meeting we had with the Housing and Homeless Coalition. And I just, desperation is the mother of invention, I think the old quote says, but I really felt so passionate about, I had researched, and I love to tell the story on my husband a little bit, but that I couldn't sleep at night trying to figure out how to solve this problem of homelessness in the Valley, and was up at night looking at models, and the PowerPoint that I shared all across the Valley in different places that I've spoken about earlier really came from a combination of John Bon Jovi's Soul Kitchen in Philadelphia and Delancey Street in San Francisco and a Ben & Jerry's ice cream shop in Portland that had 8 beds of transitional housing upstairs and trained kids. And I just kept saying, we've got to have the job training piece, and this all has to come together to really fit our community. And Peter Burchell, who's the founder of Burchell High School, had coached me, do not do anything with kids without offering them job training. You're failing if you do that. It has to be job training. And he was such an advocate for that. And I felt so passionate. By the time I got done with the research and getting encouragement from all the people that I felt like really knew what we were trying to do, I felt so passionate, and it was so disheartening to go into those meetings and have people say, well, this will never work, and you're not capable, and you don't know what you're doing, and that you're irresponsible for taking donations. Remember, we were told that, Michael.
And I remember our response to being irresponsible was, it would be irresponsible to do nothing.
Yes. And so I feel like that experience was really important, because when I have somebody come into my circle or my staff who's passionate. Justin Pendergrass is a survivor of a suicide attempt. So when I have somebody who comes in who says, look, I know this from the inside. I feel passionate about this. This is what I'd like to do. My goal is always to dump gasoline on that fire. And I met Stacy Yates 5 years ago at a Chamber of Commerce meeting. She worked for a local mortgage company, and she came up to me after I talked about the trafficking issues and said, if you ever need somebody, I have lived experience and I have a dream of someday being able to work in that field and make a difference. And so I worked. It took about 5 years to get funding. And it came through to the Department of Justice and Alaska Housing just to acknowledge those pathways for a position for her to come to work for me. And as soon as I had the funding, I called her and said, I got the money. Are you still interested? So finding those people that are passionate, Michael, and then giving them a platform to operate from where they can really make a difference in the community. John Green and you and Carl and Kirby and that team that was the Mat-Su Opioid Task Force in the early days. In 2015, we founded that task force amidst an absolutely overwhelming series of overdoses that were devastating, and deaths. I mean, I think we lost 11 kids in 12 months. And it was crushing us, and we just had to do something. And that was where the energy went. And it was so functional to have that coalition to be able to do the work at the state level and the community level, and to get the Narcan kits in place, and to bring together the families that were hurting, and have a vigil where we let the paper lanterns go in the sky with the names of the family members, tied onto him. And it was devastating, but it was also beautiful. And I really believe that those coalitions make such a difference, because they're staffed by people that are passionate and that have that lived experience. And instead of saying it'll never work, you don't know what you're doing, go back to the mortgage company you worked for, we say, what training do you need? How can we help you? We'd like to dump gasoline on that fire and see you be able to live your dream. That's all the time that we have today. I want to thank Michael Carson for being here. Michael, do you have any last things that you want to add?
Yeah, real quickly, the Mat-Su Opioid Task Force is sponsoring Kelsey's Law. That is a lesson, a 1-hour lesson for middle school and high school kids once a year on the science of addiction. Basically, in short, how opioids hack and whack the brain. And we're moving towards getting that mandated through legislation. So we will keep you in the loop, and anyone that would like to support Kelsey's Law, we would love to have you sign on. So that's our next action out of the Mat-Su Opioid Task Force. And thank you, Michelle, for having me. It was great to reminisce, and we've come so far, and it's going to be amazing where we're going to go from here.
Amen, my brother. The My House podcast is recorded at the My House studio in Wasilla, Alaska. Our awesome producer and editor is Isaac Smolden. I'm Michelle Overstreet, and until next time.